The bride that day didn't wear a white dress. She wore a mask. And right in front of where the wedding was held, she hung a sign with her parents' photo, barring them from entering. But the mother didn't cry. She simply gripped the steering wheel tighter and made a decision. From this day on, I will walk away from the wrong door.
Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
My name is Marla Jennings. I'm 64 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. 6 hours behind the wheel, and the road didn't get easier. Ray offered to drive, twice. I refused. I needed to feel the weight of this. I needed to be the one holding the wheel. Maybe, in some small way, I thought that if I kept moving forward, mile after mile, I could steer us back into our daughter's life. We passed fields dressed in early summer corn, gas stations selling yesterday's coffee, and churches with fading white paint. The farther we drove, the more out of place I felt, like a stray thread hanging from someone else's expensive tapestry. The wedding invitation had arrived late, a thin envelope with no return address tucked under a pile of junk mail. No call, no message, just a date, a time, and an address scribbled in a style that wasn't her handwriting. No, love Lacey, no, Mom and Dad. But it was something. After 3 years of silence, it was a crack in the wall. And I, God help me, I took it as hope. Ray packed the car while I picked out a dress. Not new, but still elegant. Navy blue, with the hem I'd fixed myself. I curled my hair, touched up the lipstick I hadn't worn since my retirement dinner, and wrapped the gift with care. It was a Le Creuset Dutch oven, fire red, the same one Lacey had once circled in a catalogue saying, "Someday, when I host Christmas, I want this on my table." Well, someday had arrived. The Pennington estate was massive, white columns, manicured hedges, a fountain with swans too still to be real. It wasn't just a wedding venue, it was a statement. Ray shifted in his seat as we reached the tall black gates. He adjusted his tie, then glanced at me. "You ready?" I nodded, but the knot in my throat said otherwise. Then we saw it, the sign. It wasn't subtle. Security threat, do not admit, our faces, right there, printed beneath the words in stark black and white. I slammed the brakes so hard the car jolted. Dust kicked up around us, and a squirrel darted into the trees. The steering wheel was suddenly the only thing holding me upright. My hands gripped it so tight, the skin went bone white. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But something inside me stopped moving. I heard Ray gasp, just once. A small, strangled sound. His breath caught like it didn't know where to go. He leaned forward, squinting, as if maybe he'd misread it, as if there was still a chance it was all a mistake. "Marla," he whispered, "what the hell is this?" I couldn't speak. My throat was a fist. The security guard didn't even flinch. He looked bored, scrolling his phone. Probably hired for the day, just following orders. And then, as if fate hadn't cut deep enough, I looked up. The balcony. There she was. Lacey, my daughter, in a gown that shimmered like it was stitched from light, surrounded by guests with sparkling flutes and practiced smiles. She was laughing, smiling wide, but not the kind of smile that warms you. No. This was the kind of smile you wear when you're afraid someone might see the truth beneath it. There was a stiffness in her jaw, a flicker in her eyes. Her body tilted ever so slightly away from the woman next to her. Alberta Pennington, no doubt. The new mother-in-law. And in that moment, I saw it all. Not just the wedding. Not just the gown or the gates or the glitz. I saw my daughter playing a part. She wasn't letting go of us because she hated us. She was letting go because we didn't fit in the story she was trying to sell. And that was almost worse. We had scrubbed floors to send her to culinary school, skipped vacations, worked weekends. I baked for church fundraisers so she could shadow chefs in New York. Ray picked up side jobs fixing neighbors' cars just so she'd have enough for textbooks. And now, here we were, uninvited, labeled a threat. I pressed my hand to my lap to stop it from trembling. She made her choice, I finally said. Ray turned to me. His voice cracked. You sure? Maybe we just... I shook my head. No. We didn't belong here. We were the people who taught her that happiness came from Sunday pancakes and backyard cookouts, from hand-me-down sweaters and long walks after dinner. We told her love didn't need chandeliers. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe happiness does need a chandelier, and a gate, and a sign, to keep out the people who knew you before the performance began. I looked back at the Dutch oven on the seat behind me, still wrapped in lavender paper, a ribbon tied by hand. We turned the car around. The gravel crunched beneath the tires. The estate faded behind us like a scene from someone else's movie. No one chased us. No one called our names. As we merged back onto the highway, the signs still burned in my mind. Not just the words, but the feeling of them, like someone had carved them into my chest. Ray stared out the window. He hadn't said a word since. His hand rested on his knee, fingers twitching. The same hand that once steadied Lacey's bike. I thought I'd feel rage, but what I felt instead was worse. Stillness. A hollow, frozen stillness. She used to laugh when I burned the toast, Ray said quietly. Remember that? I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. We didn't talk the rest of the ride. We just let the silence say what words couldn't. By the time the city skyline returned, I felt different, like someone had peeled away my last layer of denial. The wound wasn't new. It had just been reopened. When we finally stepped inside our apartment, the familiar scent of lemon cleaner and old wood wrapped around us like a worn blanket. Usually it felt comforting. Tonight, it felt small. Too small to hold the weight sitting on my chest. I placed the wedding gift on the kitchen table and let my hand rest on the lavender paper. It still held the warmth of my lap from the drive home. Funny how an object can change meaning so quickly. A few hours ago, it felt like a promise. Now it felt like a bruise. Ray shut the door behind him with a gentle thud, as if he didn't want to disturb something fragile in the air. He tossed his suit jacket over a chair, but it slid off and fell to the floor. He stared at it for a long second before bending slowly to pick it up. The movement seemed to take everything out of him. I thought, he said softly, not finishing the sentence. I knew what he thought. I thought it too. That maybe, just maybe, the invitation was a signal that the ice between us and Lacey had finally cracked. But some ice doesn't melt. Some ice has to be shattered. I walked into the bedroom, pulled my hairpins out one by one, letting the curls fall onto my shoulders. My scalp ached, not from the pins, but from holding myself together all day. On the nightstand sat a small ceramic plate Lacey made when she was 10. The glaze was cracked, the edges uneven, but she'd painted 3 little strawberries in the center, each one lopsided and adorable. For years, she used it to hold her barrettes. Now I used it for my earrings. I traced a finger over the strawberries. 3 of them, our little family. But the paint was chipped now. Bare ceramic showed through. I swallowed the tightness in my throat and turned away. On the top shelf of the closet, under a stack of quilts, was something I hadn't touched since my retirement. My old catering binder. It still smelled faintly of flour and cinnamon, 40 years of my life pressed between its pages. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat down. The binder creaked when I opened it, as if waking from a long sleep. Business cards, recipe notes, client lists. All the people I'd fed and taught and learned from. I flipped until I found Tommy Burke, the old kid, the one who started in my kitchen as a dish boy and worked his way up. I dialed his number before I let myself overthink it. He answered immediately. "Marla?" His voice brightened. "I was just prepping the champagne flutes. Are you on site? Need parking directions?" I closed my eyes briefly. He really didn't know. "No, Tommy," I said quietly. "I'm not there." A beat. Then his tone shifted, softened, dropped. "What happened?" "They didn't let us in." Simple, precise, almost clinical. But inside I felt something twist. "Oh, God," he exhaled. "Marla, I'm so sorry." "It's all right," I lied. "But I need to cancel the payment, the full catering contract." "I figured you might," he said, voice heavy. I held off processing it. Something told me to wait. My throat tightened. He always had good instincts, even as a kid. "I appreciate that," I whispered. His voice cracked, almost imperceptibly. "I just wish I could have worked with you again. You trained half this city, Marla. You're a legend. I'm the one who should be thanking you." His words hit me harder than he intended, not because they were flattering, but because they reminded me of who I was outside of being a mother. "I'll still be around," I said softly. "I hope so," he replied. "And if you ever want to teach a workshop again, or help with menu development, I've got space for you. Always." That nearly broke me. "Good night, Tommy." "Good night, Chef." Chef. I hadn't heard anyone call me that in years. It unfroze something in my chest. I hung up and sat there for a long time, staring at my shaking hands. Ray stepped into the kitchen a moment later. His tie was gone, his shirt half untucked. He looked smaller somehow, like the humiliation had shrunk him from the inside. "What did he say?" Ray asked. "That it's done. Cancelled." He nodded. "Good." But then his face tightened. Not in anger, in heartbreak. "I still don't understand," he whispered. "How did we become unwanted? How does a child just—" His voice cracked. "Erase her parents?" I walked to him and placed my hands on his shoulders. "She didn't erase us, Ray. She erased herself. She's playing a part, and we don't fit the script." He closed his eyes. "Maybe we should have tried harder. Maybe we pushed too much when she pulled away. Maybe—" I touched his cheek. "Ray, stop." My voice was firmer than I felt. "We didn't fail her. We raised her, loved her, gave her everything we had. But loving a child doesn't mean losing yourself." He stared at me, eyes damp. "I just wanted today to be different." "So did I said. "But pretending we belong somewhere we're not wanted doesn't make us noble. It just makes us small." He nodded slowly, and the acceptance, painful but real, settled across his features. I walked to the bookshelf, picked up the framed photo of Lacey at 8 years old, holding her blue ribbon pie. Her smile back then was honest, pure, whole. I held the photo close, brushing a thumb across her cheek. Then it happened. A tear. Just one. The first and only one that day. It rolled down my face and hit the glass with a tiny sound. Ray watched quietly from across the room. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply let me have that moment, the way a good man does. I placed the photo face down on the shelf, not to reject her, but to release the version of her I'd kept trapped in my memory. The girl in that photo wasn't the woman who shut us out today, and the woman who shut us out today wasn't ready to come home. Ray stepped beside me. I'm not angry, he whispered. Just hurt. I know, I said. Hurt is what you feel when something mattered. We stood there in the soft glow of the living room lamp. The ticking clock on the wall filled the silence with its steady heartbeat. For the first time in years, the apartment felt like ours again. Not a waiting room for her return, but a place where we still had a life left to live. I walked to the kitchen, unwrapped the lavender paper around the wedding gift, folded the paper neatly, and tucked it inside a drawer. I placed the Dutch oven beside my own in the cabinet. The hollow ache in my chest eased just a little. Not healed, but unburdened. Ray leaned in the doorway, watching me. You sure you're okay? He asked. No, I answered honestly, but I'm sure I'm done lowering myself. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That's my girl. We turned off the lights together and walked to the bedroom like two people who had just survived a storm. Not victorious, but still standing. Sometimes, survival is enough. And sometimes, it's the first step towards something stronger. That night, lying on my side of the bed, I stared at the ceiling until the darkness softened and my breath finally steadied. The ice hadn't just broken. It had cracked all the way through. And though it hurt, it also freed something inside me I hadn't realized was frozen. I didn't want to look. I told myself that a dozen times as I sat curled on the couch that evening, cradling a cup of chamomile tea that had long gone cold. But curiosity is a quiet thief. It doesn't knock. It slips in through the cracks of your resolve, especially when you're a mother. Ray was in the kitchen, humming something tuneless, the hum of a man trying not to think too hard. I reached beneath the coffee table and pulled out my old iPad. It hadn't been charged in days, maybe weeks, but somehow it still had 11% battery, just enough. I tapped open the browser, typed in the name of the local society blog I hadn't checked since Lacey moved out. My fingers hovered before I pressed enter, as if I could delay the inevitable with hesitation. Then I saw it. Chaos at Pennington Wedding. Catering team walks out mid-reception. I didn't click right away. I just stared at the words. There's a certain kind of ache that blooms not from surprise, but confirmation. I'd spent the day holding back everything. Tears, anger, humiliation. But now it all pressed in at once. When I finally clicked, the article loaded with a slideshow. The first photo showed the ballroom, gleaming with chandeliers and blush roses, the kind of room where fairy tales are staged. But something felt wrong. No servers, no trays. Guests sitting stiffly, some with their arms folded, eyes cast toward the kitchen. Multiple guests confirmed that food service was halted mid-event. A representative from the catering company stated that due to a contract issue, they were instructed to suspend operations immediately. I closed my eyes. I didn't need more. I already saw it playing out like a film I'd watched 1,000 times. Only this time it wasn't fiction. It was my daughter's reality folding in on itself. Tommy told me later how it all went down. It started small. A string on the cello snapped mid-piece. Just a sharp little ping, barely enough to notice, but still unsettling. Then silence. A stillness too long to be an accident. The servers stopped emerging from the kitchen. No salads, no champagne refills, no movement behind the bar. Just whispers starting to rise like slow smoke. Lacey stood near the head table, bouquet in hand. She smiled. God bless her, she tried. But it was the kind of smile you wear when you can feel the seams coming apart. Then Tommy, ever the professional, stepped into the center of the ballroom. Vest pressed, clipboard steady. Ladies and gentlemen, he said with practiced calm, due to a contractual issue, We must suspend all service effective immediately. You could have heard a fork drop. Alberta Pennington blinked like someone had spoken to her in a foreign language. Excuse me? Tommy didn't flinch. The authorized payer revoked the contract. We cannot continue operations without updated confirmation of responsibility. Trevor got up, face tight. This is obviously a mistake. Continue the service. I'll fix it. Tommy remained firm. I'm sorry, sir. My staff is already packing. The contract is void. Then Lacey stepped in. It's fine. Really. My parents... She glanced quickly around. They'll handle it. Just a miscommunication? The irony sliced deeper than any insult. My parents. As if we hadn't been turned away at the gate like strangers. As if our names weren't slapped under the word threat. The guests were no longer pretending. Some were already checking their phones. Others fanned themselves, whispering louder now. And then, the smell. The unmistakable scent of food losing its soul. Warm entrees turning lukewarm. Sauces congealing under unused heat lamps. That smell of something once beautiful, now fading by the minute. A woman near the back muttered, "They didn't pay?" Another said, "I knew it was too perfect." Someone laughed, short and sharp. Lacey tried to speak again, but her voice cracked. "Please, everyone, just stay seated. It's being resolved." But it wasn't. Nothing was. I set the iPad down on the coffee table and rubbed my eyes. Ray returned from the kitchen, drying his hands. "You all right?" I didn't answer right away. He sat beside me. "What happened?" I turned the screen toward him. He read in silence, jaw tightening as he scrolled. When he reached the end, he set it down, sighing heavily. "She must be devastated." I let out a soft, bitter laugh. "After what she did to us? After posting our photos like criminals?" "I'm not excusing it," he said gently. "But no one deserves that kind of public embarrassment." "She was fine embarrassing us." Ray looked at me carefully. "Marla, you don't have to feel bad for her, but don't let this poison you." I stared at the photo of the ballroom again. So polished, so sterile. "She built her life on appearances," I said. "She traded family for fantasy. Now the illusion's cracked." Ray nodded slowly. "We would have helped her, paid for it all, if she'd just asked. She didn't want help. She wanted to erase where she came from." We sat in silence a long time. "I thought cutting off the payment would just be about boundaries," I said. "But now I see, it wasn't just money. It was truth. That whole night was built on a lie." Ray reached for my hand. "We told her love didn't need chandeliers or rented estates. But maybe she needed to learn it the hard way." I leaned against his shoulder. "The worst part is, I don't feel better." "That means your heart's still good," he whispered. We turned off the lamp and let the city hum outside our window. And across town, under flickering candlelight and thinning applause, my daughter stood in a silk gown in a room that had finally stopped pretending. The music had died. The food had spoiled. The guests had begun to leave. And with them, so did the illusion. The next morning came like a hush after a storm. No sirens, no wind, just a stillness that didn't feel peaceful, just quiet. Too quiet. I stood at the kitchen sink, staring at the steam rising from my mug. Outside, a neighbor's kid chased pigeons on the sidewalk. Ray sat at the table, scrolling slowly through his phone, his glasses sliding low on his nose. He hadn't spoken since breakfast. The coffee tasted bitter. I didn't add sugar. Then the phone rang. Tommy's name lit up the screen. I answered without thinking. "How bad?" He let out a long breath. Worse than I imagined. I sat down slowly. Tell me. The unravelling, as Tommy told it, was quiet at first. Guests whispered. Some laughed nervously. Alberta Pennington paced near the champagne bar, waving off the waitstaff with a flutter of manicured fingers. Then someone, maybe the pianist, asked if there would be any further instruction. That's when the truth began to slip through. I thought her parents were paying for all this, Alberta hissed, not quite whispering anymore. That's when Trevor stepped in. He looked uncomfortable, sweating under his tux, tugging at the collar. We discussed things, he said. Her family was supposed to take care of the venue, catering, and decor. One of Alberta's sisters leaned forward. You mean you didn't pay for the wedding? Trevor shook his head. We handled the honeymoon, rings, and photography. But the bulk was supposed to be covered by her parents. That was the arrangement. Alberta turned sharply to Lacey. Is that true? Lacey's eyes darted around, blinking rapidly. It was supposed to be, yes, until they changed their minds. They didn't change their minds, Alberta snapped. You cut them out. That's not the same. Lacey's voice cracked. They wouldn't have fit in, not with how we wanted the night to feel. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was judgment, wrapped in disbelief. Trevor ran a hand through his hair. We used the last of the savings on the deposit. Everything else was riding on them. That's when it happened. Someone, Tommy didn't say who, laughed, just once. A short, sharp chuckle that sliced through the air like a crack of thunder. Another guest muttered, So this whole thing was smoke and mirrors? Then it unravelled faster. The estate, rented by the hour. The gown, on loan from a boutique, tags hidden in the lining. The diamonds, fake. Even the calligraphy on the invites had been done by a Fiverr freelancer in Belarus. It wasn't a wedding. It was a staged illusion, and it had just collapsed in front of 75 people in formal wear. Tommy's voice lowered. Marla. The way she looked when it all came out. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even crying. She just crumbled. Like she couldn't believe her own story stopped working. I closed my eyes. That, more than anything, broke my heart. Later that afternoon, I sat on the living room rug with a box of old photos and mementos, our daughter at age 5, sitting on Ray's shoulders during the 4th of July parade. Her 8th birthday cake, shaped like a lemon pie. That ridiculous family costume we wore one Halloween as kitchen utensils. Ray sat in the recliner, watching me. Why are you torturing yourself? He asked softly. I'm not, I said. I'm remembering what was real, before all this. He didn't answer, just looked tired, older than usual. She's not the same person, he said finally. I don't know when the switch flipped. She learned that appearances open doors, I replied, and she mistook the hallway for a home. He nodded. I would have paid for that wedding, you know, if she'd just asked. Hell, if she'd just called. I know, I whispered. I looked down at a photograph of Lacey holding a pie, grinning wide with flour on her cheeks. She must have been 8, maybe 9. That was the year she won her first blue ribbon. She used to be proud of things she made with her hands. Now she borrows things made by strangers. Around 6 that evening, I opened my laptop and checked her social media. I shouldn't have. I know that. But part of me had to see how she was spinning it. She posted a single picture. Sunset lighting, soft focus, hair curled just so. Her standing in front of a mirror, hands on her waist. The caption read, What matters most can't be cancelled. I stared at it. No mention of the truth. No acknowledgement. just a poetic deflection wrapped in curated lighting. Ray walked over, read it, and leaned back with a sigh. Still performing? I nodded. Even when the stage has burned down. Do you think she believes it? He asked. I think she needs to, I said. Because if she stops pretending for even a second, she'll have to look at who she's become. And that's the scariest thing of all. He ran a hand down his face. I miss her. I miss her too, I said. But not the woman in that picture. I miss the girl who used to ask if cinnamon could go in everything. That night, before bed, I found the old ribbon, the one from the junior bake-off. I hadn't touched it in years. She was so proud that day. She told everyone at church, wore it on her backpack until the thread frayed. I turned it over in my hand, rubbing the edge between my thumb and forefinger. It felt soft, almost fragile, like memory itself. I placed it back in the drawer, this time on top. A reminder, not of her perfection, but of her possibility. We didn't break her wedding. We didn't sabotage her joy. We simply stopped holding up a mirror that distorted the truth. And when the mirror cracked, so did the illusion. And maybe, just maybe, what's left behind can finally begin to heal. I once read that when a storm ends, animals come out before people, as if they know when it's safe to step back into the light. But sometimes, the aftermath is the real danger, because that's when silence returns. And silence can be deafening. 2 days after the wedding, I got a call I never expected. It came from a number I didn't recognize. No caller ID, no voicemail. Just a quiet insistence in the way the screen lit up. I answered on the third ring. This is Marla. A voice, calm and composed, replied, Mrs. Jennings, this is Frank McAllister. I manage the White Row estate, where your daughter's wedding was held. I didn't speak, just waited. I realize you're no longer associated with the event, he continued, but I felt it would be decent to inform you of the situation. Things have escalated. That word landed hard. He explained, gently but clearly, that the rental period had expired nearly 36 hours ago. Payments had bounced. Phones weren't answered. The venue had sent emails, called Alberta, reached out to Trevor. No reply. They left it all behind, he said. Linens, decorations, a cake half melted in the heat. It's like they couldn't face packing up the failure. And Lacey. She's still here. I imagined her there. The grand ballroom stripped of its illusion. Tables half cleared, flowers wilted, the scent of spoiled frosting lingering in the air like old perfume. Tommy later filled in the rest. Frank arrived that morning with his 2 Dobermans, Athena and Duke. Not for intimidation, just protocol. When people don't pay, they often get desperate. Frank wasn't taking chances. But Lacey didn't protest. She was found sitting on the edge of the marble fountain in the garden, still in her wedding dress, though it was now crumpled and stained. Her shoes were gone. Her hair had fallen from its pins. Tommy watched from a distance. He said she looked, not broken, but hollowed out, like a house after the fire, still standing, but empty inside. Frank approached carefully, his dog sitting obediently at his heel. He spoke quietly, the way someone might speak to a child who'd wandered too far from home. Miss Jennings, he said, I'm afraid we have to lock up. The estate is not available beyond this hour without new arrangements. She didn't look up right away, just kept tracing her finger along the stone rim of the fountain, then softly. Do you know what it cost? Frank hesitated. Ma'am? This dress, she whispered. It wasn't even mine. The boutique loaned it in exchange for photos. I never owned it. Frank didn't respond. Lacey finally looked at him. I spent more time choosing fonts for the invitation than talking to my father this year. That stopped him. She stood slowly, the skirt of her gown dragging through the grass. I thought if it all looked perfect, if the lights were right, the flowers expensive, enough, maybe people wouldn't see what was missing. He gave her space to say more, but she didn't. Finally, she asked, "Can I have a few more minutes?" Frank nodded. Of course, but when the gates close, they stay closed. A photo surfaced online later that day, sent anonymously to my inbox. Lacey, sitting just outside the estate's iron gate, her back to the camera. Dress puddled around her like silk snow. One of Frank's Dobermans sat beside her, not leashed, just present. They looked like two souls who had nowhere else to be. I stared at that image for a long time, not because it was dramatic, but because it was the most honest I'd seen her in years. There was no filter, no posing, no crowd, just a girl at the end of her story. That evening, Ray and I sat on the couch, the television flickering quietly in the background. Neither of us was watching. "She stayed until they made her leave," I said finally. Ray nodded, rubbing the side of his temple. "She didn't know where else to go. She thought the performance would carry her further than it did." "She thought we were the problem," he said. "But all we ever did was love her, just not on her terms." The words sat heavy in the room. I walked to the bookshelf, pulled down a photo album. We flipped it open together, page by page. Lacey at 2, covered in spaghetti sauce. At 7, arms crossed after losing at Monopoly. At 13, holding up her acceptance letter to culinary camp. She had always been a girl who chased beauty. But she used to understand it wasn't something you wore, it was something you cooked, crafted, created. Now she rented it, wore it like armor. And it shattered. Frank called one more time before closing up that night. "I just wanted to say," he said, "she wasn't rude. She didn't cry. But she looked like someone waiting for a door that wouldn't open." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thank you for treating her kindly." "She didn't need discipline," he said. "She needed truth. And space. Truth. And space. Maybe that's all healing ever really needs." I didn't reach out to her that night. I didn't text, didn't send comfort or criticism. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer where I kept the napkin from her first junior bake-off, the one where she signed it with a blue marker right next to a smudge of apple pie. "Love you, Mum. Always." I unfolded it, held it in my hands. That girl still lived somewhere inside the woman outside the gate. And if she ever wanted to come home, not to the apartment, not to the past, but to herself, we'd be here. But only if she came without the mask. Because this time there'd be no stage left to stand on. There are rides you take hoping for a destination. And there are rides you take because you've finally given up chasing one. The drive back to Chicago was the latter. We didn't talk much. Ray had both hands on the wheel, like he was holding something fragile between them. Outside, the sky was dull and low, pressing down on the horizon as if it too was tired. It wasn't the silence that hurt. It was the quiet acceptance that came with it. Like a funeral procession where everyone already knows the eulogy by heart. I looked at his profile. My husband of nearly 40 years. The lines at the corner of his mouth had deepened since Lacey started pulling away. But his eyes, they held on. To me. To her. To hope. I wasn't sure what they held now. About halfway through the drive, we pulled off near a rest stop. Ray didn't say anything. He just parked and leaned forward, resting his forehead against the steering wheel. I got out to stretch my legs, the cold hitting my chest like a gentle slap. Inside the station, everything smelled like stale popcorn and coffee that had been burnt an hour too long. I wandered the aisles, touching items without picking them up. A lighter, a travel-size shampoo, a puzzle book. I ended up buying us 2 cups of coffee. Cheap. Bitter. Exactly what the moment called for. When I handed Ray his cup back at the car, he looked at me with eyes full of something I couldn't name. Not quite grief, not quite peace. Maybe something in between. "I don't feel angry," he said. I thought I would. "I think we left anger back at the gate," I replied, settling into my seat. He nodded, turning the key. The engine hummed to life. Good. Let it stay there. When we pulled into our building's parking lot, the city looked exactly as we left it. Unbothered, unknowing. Someone down the street was yelling at a cab. A siren howled somewhere in the distance. The streetlights flickered like they always did. Home. But this time, it didn't feel like a return. It felt like starting over in a place that had waited patiently for us. Our apartment smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. I kicked off my shoes while Ray dropped the keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. The sound it made, soft, final, echoed louder than I expected. I stood in the middle of our living room, staring at the couch, the blanket we left folded before leaving, the wedding gift still wrapped in pale lavender ribbon. I had placed so much hope into that package. I walked over, slowly unwrapped it, and opened the lid. A custom Dutch oven, deep blue, the kind that could outlive its owner. Ray peeked over my shoulder. "Nice one." "Too nice for people who don't know how to sit at a table," I murmured. I placed it gently in the cabinet where my mother's roaster used to be, and just like that, the gift was no longer for her. It was for us. Ray made tea while I opened the windows. The December air was sharp, but I needed it, needed something real against my skin. When I came back into the kitchen, he was sitting at the table, hands wrapped around the mug. They trembled slightly, not from nerves, not from age, from emotion maybe, from release. "You okay?" I asked. He shrugged. "I keep thinking about how I used to drive her to school. She always wanted the windows down, even in winter. Said the wind made her feel alive." I sat across from him. "She was always chasing something, even back then. Do you think she knew what she was doing to us?" I thought about it. I think she knew, but I don't think she felt it. Not until now. He nodded slowly, gaze fixed on the swirling tea. "Do you regret it?" I asked. He looked up. "Driving all that way? Getting humiliated?" "No. Loving her." Ray took a long breath. "Not for a second." Neither did I. Later that evening, we settled onto the couch. I pulled the old quilt over our legs, the one his mother made when we got engaged. Some of the threads had frayed. One corner was almost see-through, but it held. Ray leaned into me, head resting on my shoulder. I reached over and turned off the lamp. Darkness fell around us like a blanket. "Do you think she's okay?" he asked softly. "She's not," I said, honesty cutting through the warmth. "But she's closer now than she was before." He didn't respond, but I felt his nod. I used to think healing would look like reconciliation, a hug, a tearful apology, a mended relationship wrapped up with a neat little bow. But healing looks more like this. 2 cups of tea, a frayed quilt, the sound of traffic 5 floors below. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. We didn't come back to celebrate. We came back to remember who we were before we became people trying to earn love that should have been freely given. And in that remembering, there was peace. That night, just before bed, I walked into the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept the napkin from Lacey's first bake-off win. The ink had faded. The corner had torn. But I could still read the words. "Love you, Mum. Always." I pressed it to my chest. Not in longing, but in farewell. Then I slid it back into the drawer, turned off the kitchen light, and walked into the bedroom where Ray was already asleep, his hand resting on my side of the bed like a promise. I slipped in beside him, and for the first time in years, I didn't dream of what could have been. I dreamed of what still was. The knock came at 7:12 a.m., sharp, not frantic, not angry, just insistent, like someone hoping politeness might earn forgiveness. I was still in my robe, barefoot on the cold kitchen tile, cradling a half-drunk cup of chamomile tea when I heard it. Ray was in the bathroom, the low buzz of his old electric razor humming against the morning silence. The second knock came, then a third, with just enough pause between them to suggest this wasn't a stranger or someone planning to leave anytime soon. I walked slowly to the door, not rushing, not afraid, just prepared. I already knew who it was. Some things a mother senses before her eyes catch up. I peered through the peephole. Lacey, standing there in a beige trench coat too thin for December, her hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful. Behind her were Alberta and Trevor Pennington, standing a few paces back, trying to appear dignified, but clearly uncomfortable. The cold air was biting, their cheeks red and breath visible. I didn't open the door fully, just enough to let the chain lock catch, leaving a 4-inch opening between us. A boundary, visible and immovable. Lacey stepped forward, her eyes instantly searching mine. "Mum?" she said softly. Her voice cracked, but whether from emotion or cold, I couldn't say. I didn't respond. Ray emerged behind me, wiping his hands with a towel. When he saw who was on the other side of the door, he stopped, his body tensed. He said nothing, but I felt the shift in him like a ripple through the air. "Please," Lacey said, eyes darting between us. "We just want to talk. Just for a moment." Her voice had that old sweetness again, the one she used to use when she wanted to stay out past curfew. But I was older now, and tired. "You've had your moment," I said, "at the gate, at the wedding, and all the years leading up to it." Lacey swallowed hard. I know how bad it looked. But I didn't mean for things to go that way." Behind her, Alberta shifted impatiently. Trevor looked down at his shoes. "I made mistakes," Lacey continued, stepping closer. "But there's something you need to know." She paused, as if choosing her words like a script. "I'm pregnant." Ray inhaled sharply behind me. His body jerked slightly, a reflex, fatherhood reflex maybe, that part of him still wanting to protect, even when it hurt. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached for a folded envelope resting on the console table near the door. I slid it through the narrow opening. Lacey took it, eyes questioning. She unfolded the paper, and her eyes scanned it quickly. A letterhead from her OB-GYN, dated 3 weeks prior. Summary: consultation completed. No pregnancy. No treatment plan. No prenatal care. Her lips parted. No words came. "You've always been clever," I said quietly. "But you forgot I've known you since before you had teeth. You can't fake this kind of thing, not to me." "Mum, Look me in the eye, Lacey, right now, and tell me you're pregnant." She looked everywhere but at me, at the floor, at the hinges, at her husband. Trevor cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Mrs. Jennings, perhaps we're just all a bit emotional. We came here in good faith. There are unresolved matters, expenses. And it seems there's been a misunderstanding about the wedding payments. You mean the ones we cancelled after being publicly humiliated? Ray snapped. That misunderstanding? Trevor faltered. Alberta stepped in. We just want what's fair. I let out a soft, joyless laugh. Fair? I echoed. You don't get to demand fairness from people you've discarded? Lacey's eyes welled with tears. I didn't mean to discard you. I didn't want to embarrass anyone. I thought, maybe things would be easier if... You erased us, I interrupted. You didn't set a boundary. You drew a target. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I softened, just slightly. You could have just told the truth. Even that would have hurt less than this. Ray leaned in slightly. We raised you better than this, Lace. She winced at the nickname. I didn't think you'd come, she said finally. To the wedding? Well, I said. We did. And now we've left. That's how that chapter ends. Her hand gripped the paper, now crumpled. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sure you are, I said. But not for the reasons that matter. I started to close the door. Wait, Mom, please. I paused. That word again. Mom. It hit differently this time. Not with affection, but with desperation, like she was trying to yank it back before it slipped away forever. I looked at her. My daughter, who once fell asleep on my chest, with graham cracker crumbs on her cheek, who once begged me to stay in her room 5 more minutes at bedtime, who once hugged me in public without shame, now a stranger. You made your choice, I said. Now we're making ours. I closed the door. The chain lock clicked shut. Not loud, but it echoed. We stood in silence. Ray leaned against the wall, his eyes shut. I heard the faint shuffle of retreating footsteps. Then the elevator dinged. She was gone. For good this time, I thought. That afternoon, Ray sat in the garage with the door cracked open, letting in the cold. He held an old wrench in his lap, something from the repair shop we closed years ago, a symbol of a life that once was. She tried to lie her way back in, he said, using a child that doesn't even exist. She didn't know any other way, I replied. She never learned what honesty costs. He looked at me. Do you think she ever loved us? I didn't answer. I wasn't sure anymore what love looked like through her eyes. Maybe she did. Maybe she just forgot how to show it. That night, I made soup. Simple. Potatoes, leeks, a little rosemary. Ray helped set the table, folding napkins without asking. We ate in silence, punctuated only by spoons clinking bowls. There was no joy, but there was peace. A small, quiet peace that whispered, we survived. There was a knock again, but this time it came at noon, broad daylight, as if that would somehow change the weight of what they came to ask. Ray looked up from the newspaper, his glasses slipping down his nose. You want me to get it? I shook my head. No, I said quietly. This one's mine. I walked to the door with a calm I didn't know I had left. When I opened it, I didn't bother with the chain lock this time. I knew who was on the other side. Lacey, Trevor, Alberta. Same formation, different day. Except this time Lacey's eyes were dull. No mascara, no act. Just a kind of raw, restless desperation. Trevor cleared his throat. We understand you made a sizable financial decision. I said nothing. He continued, choosing his words carefully, like I might explode. It concerns a sum that was originally discussed as part of the wedding arrangements. The contribution your family would make. Alberta, in her tailored coat and stiff posture, jumped in. The dowry? Ray barked out a laugh from the living room, not amused, just astonished. Dowry, he muttered. What century is this? Trevor held up a hand, trying to regain control. We just mean there were expectations. Things were said. Plans were made. I reached behind me and took the manila envelope from the side table. I handed it to Lacey without a word. She opened it. Inside was a single folded receipt. Donation to Midwest Hospice for the terminally ill. Amount $50,000. Date the night of the wedding. Lacey's lips moved, but no sound came. Trevor peered over her shoulder. You gave it away? I gave it to people who needed it more than you, I said. More than any of this. Alberta looked like she had swallowed a wasp. That money was promised. No, I said calmly. It was never promised. It was assumed. There's a difference. Lacey looked up at me. Her voice came out in a whisper. Why would you do that? I looked her in the eye. For once, she didn't look away. Because I can't buy your love, Lacey. God knows I've tried. In meals, in favors, in silence. But money? That's where I stop. That's where I end. Trevor stepped forward, his jaw tightening. So you're just cutting her off? After everything? Ray stood now, quietly. He didn't raise his voice. But when he spoke, it was like a line being drawn. We're not cutting her off. She already did that. We're just finally accepting it. Alberta's face hardened. This is unnecessary drama. Ray smiled without warmth. Lady, we've lived in unnecessary drama for 3 years now. We're done paying rent on it. I turned to Lacey. I hope one day you find the kind of peace you were always chasing. But you won't find it in dollar signs or borrowed mansions. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. I thought we could still be a family. So did I said. But families don't build fences and call them gates. There was a silence, long, heavy, final. Then Lacey did something I hadn't expected. She nodded, just once, like she understood. Or maybe like she finally saw the version of me who wouldn't bend anymore. She turned away. Trevor and Alberta hesitated, then followed. No one said goodbye, but as they walked down the hallway, Alberta turned back and hissed under her breath. This isn't over. I didn't flinch. I didn't answer. I just closed the door, gently but firmly, and turned the deadbolt. 10 minutes later, there was a knock again. For a brief second, I thought maybe she came back. Just to say sorry. Just to say something. But it wasn't Lacey. It was Officer Rivera, a young cop from the neighborhood precinct. His uniform looked too crisp, too new. Probably hadn't been on the force a full year yet. He smiled politely. Ma'am, we got a call about a potential disturbance here. Neighbors reported raised voices. I gestured inside. Just some old hurt being laid to rest. He looked past me at Ray, who raised his cup of tea in mock salute. No charges, no yelling, no trouble, I added. Just closure. Rivera nodded, satisfied. Understood. Have a good day, ma'am. And with that, even the law closed the book on them. That night, I pulled out a blanket I hadn't used in years. It used to sit on Lacey's childhood bed, the one with sunflowers on it, the one she used to insist was too babyish by the time she turned 12. She never wanted it again after that. I wrapped it around my shoulders and sat on the porch with Ray. The Chicago wind was biting, but neither of us moved. We watched the cars pass slowly down the street, headlights carving shadows against the buildings. Neither of us said anything for a long while. Finally, Ray asked, "Do you regret it?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "The money helped someone who needed it. We gave it meaning. That's more than I can say for how it was going to be used. He nodded slowly. Still hurts, though. It will, I said. Until it doesn't. He reached over and took my hand. It was the first time in days he'd done that without hesitation. The porch light flickered above us. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, faint and low. We sat under the stars that night, wrapped in the silence of people who had chosen peace over pretending. We had nothing left to give them, and that was okay, because we still had each other, and that was finally enough. The morning after everything ended, the air felt different, lighter, like the apartment itself had exhaled, finally letting go of the tension that had coiled through its walls for years. I stood by the kitchen window with a mug of coffee, watching the pale winter sun fight its way through the Chicago haze. Below, the street buzzed to life, buses hissing, kids hollering, the same man who sold tamales pushing his cart with his usual one-wheeled limp. Ray shuffled in from the hallway, rubbing the back of his neck. He glanced at the boxes lining the wall like soldiers. "You having a moving party I wasn't invited to?" I turned to face him, heart thudding a little. "Sit down, Ray. There's something I want to show you." He raised an eyebrow, but obeyed. I pulled the envelope from the drawer by the phone, the one I had kept hidden for 2 weeks. Inside were 2 train tickets, embossed, cream-coloured, thick like old postcards. He pulled one out, read it, looked at me. "California Zephyr," he said slowly. "Leaves tonight, sleeping car, destination, San Francisco." I nodded. "We'll see the Rockies, the desert, the ocean. We'll wake up to mountains and fall asleep to stars." His brow furrowed. "Where's the money coming from, Marla?" I took a breath. "I sold your dad's garage." He blinked. "You what?" "I called Joe. He knew a man looking to open a shop. I went down last week, signed the papers. It's done." Ray got up, started pacing. "That place? I used to hold Lacey's hand there while she helped me hand tools. Your father taught me engines in that garage." "I know," I said quietly. "But it hasn't seen oil in years, Ray. And memories, we carry them, we don't live in them." He stopped pacing. "You should have told me." I walked over, placed a hand on his chest. "I wanted to show you what it felt like to be free, to make a choice for us, not for anyone else. We've spent too long asking what people expect. I'm done with expectations." Ray looked down at me, and slowly, the tightness in his face softened. He nodded once, turned to the hall closet, and rummaged around. When he returned, he held something small in his palm, an old, rusted wrench. "The first tool I bought when I opened the garage," he murmured. "Didn't fix much, but I always kept it." I smiled. "Bring it. It's part of you. And it still works." We spent the rest of the morning in quiet motion, packing, folding, taping. I took down the picture of Lacey from her 10th birthday, her cheeks covered in frosting, eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, my hand hovered, wanting to place it in the keep pile. But instead, I wrapped it in brown paper and placed it in a box labelled storage. Ray found our wedding album. He laughed at the sight of his mullet. "My God," he muttered, shaking his head. I looked like a country singer on a losing streak. "And I looked like I had a helmet on my head," I replied. "You were beautiful. You were trying too hard to be cool." We both laughed. It felt strange and good, like stretching limbs that hadn't moved in a while. By late afternoon, the apartment echoed. We sat on milk crates eating peanut butter sandwiches and drinking the last of the orange juice. When Ray finished his, he looked around. "You sure we're not crazy?" "Oh, I'm sure we are." I said. But maybe this time it's the good kind of crazy. Union Station felt like a cathedral, vaulted ceilings, echoes, the smell of wet coats and coffee. People moved with purpose. Businessmen with suit bags, college kids with oversized headphones, older women in fur-lined boots. We boarded with little fanfare. Our sleeper car was compact, but warm. A wide window, 2 seats that folded into a bed, a tiny fold-down sink. Ray looked around and gave a low whistle. "Not bad," he said. "Cozy?" The train gave a long, slow sigh, then jerked forward. The city blurred by, brick by brick, until all that was left was open space and tracks ahead. We sat side by side, watching the skyline shrink. I saw our old neighborhood fade into rust and graffiti. I saw the outline of the garage from a distance, just a flat roof and cracked sign now. I reached for Ray's hand. He didn't hesitate. By nightfall, we were in Iowa. The sky was an open bowl of stars. No buildings, no headlights, just dark fields and the occasional distant barn lit like a lighthouse. Ray poured us both a small drink from the tiny bar in the corner. We toasted, clinked glasses softly. "To not looking back," I said. "To still being us," he replied. Later, lying beside him in the berth, I traced the lines on his hands. They were rougher than I remembered, more permanent, but still familiar. "I missed this," I whispered. He turned to me. "I missed you. Even when you were right next to me, I missed you." There were no grand declarations, just warmth and quiet, the kind of quiet that speaks volumes. The next morning, I woke before the sun, pulled open the curtain just enough to let in the deep blue of dawn. Mountains were rising in the distance, snow-dusted, majestic, like they'd been waiting for us. Ray stirred. "Where are we?" "Somewhere better," I said. We watched together as the sun crested the ridgeline, lighting up the whole valley. The train curved along a cliff, and for a moment it felt like we were flying. Ray leaned his head on mine. "No plans after San Francisco?" "None," I said. "We can stay, we can go, we can keep riding until we forget every address we ever knew." He smiled. "Sounds like the beginning of something." I looked out at the roadless landscape, endless and open. "It is," I whispered. "It finally is." We were somewhere deep in the Nevada desert when my phone buzzed. A soft vibration at the bottom of my canvas tote, muffled under a scarf I hadn't worn in weeks. I ignored it at first. The train was gliding through a world of rust-red earth and sky so wide it made you feel like a speck in someone else's painting. Ray was asleep beside me, his arms folded across his chest, chin tucked to one side, breathing steady. His snoring, low and almost rhythmic, was more comforting than silence. I let the call go to voicemail. Then it buzzed again. Same number. Then again. By the third ring, something nudged me. I slipped the phone out, thumbed it open, and saw 3 missed calls from an unknown number. 1 new voicemail. Curious now, I slipped out of the cabin and into the narrow hallway between cars. It was quiet there. Just the clatter of steel wheels humming beneath my feet and the hiss of cold air seeping through the door seams. I leaned against the wall and pressed play. "Hello, Mrs. Jennings. This is Linda from Evergreen Hospice Foundation. I'm calling about the donation you made 2 weeks ago. I just wanted to let you know the funds allowed us to move one of our long-term patients, a homeless veteran named Paul, into a private room for his final days. He passed away last night. Peacefully. With music playing and sunlight coming in through the window. We just thought you'd want to know. What you did mattered." I stood frozen, phone still pressed to my ear long after the message ended. The hallway swayed slightly with the rhythm of the train. My knees weakened, and I slid slowly to the floor, curling my arms around my legs, the phone resting on my thigh. The tears came quietly, not the angry, hot kind, not from shame or rejection. These tears were warm, cleansing. They didn't burn. They didn't demand. They simply fell, like rain watering dry ground. I cried for that man, Paul, who had no one. I cried for the daughter I had raised who had forgotten who she was, and I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who spent decades pouring love into someone who mistook it for currency. I cried because, maybe, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't carrying someone else's shame. Just my own softness, still intact. When I stood back up, something inside me had shifted. Ray was awake when I returned, gazing out the window. He didn't ask questions, but his eyes scanned my face the way only someone who has loved you through hard years knows how to do. Was it something bad? He asked softly. No, I said, my voice low but steady. Something good. The hospice called. That man. He died peacefully, in a room of his own, because of what we gave. Ray let out a breath and looked away. His hand reached out, rested on mine. Then we didn't just give money, he said. We gave him a kind ending. I nodded. I reached into my pocket again, pulled out my phone, and stared at the contact labelled Lacey. Her photo, taken on a beach when she was 16, hair wild with wind, still smiled up at me. For years, I had waited. For a call, for a visit, for a sign that the daughter I raised might still remember the sound of my voice when I told her bedtime stories, or the way I always saved the crust of my pie for her because she liked it best. But now, something had turned. I tapped edit, then hovered over delete contact. My finger trembled, not from fear, but from the gravity of what this meant. This wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness. It was acceptance. I couldn't carry what she wasn't ready to hold. Are you sure you want to delete this contact? The phone asked. Yes, I whispered, and pressed. The train rolled westward, and the terrain began to change. Red rocks softened into golden plains. Sparse bushes gave way to low, rolling hills. We were entering California. Ray and I sat side by side in silence, watching the light change. The sun dipped low, stretching shadows across the landscape. A coyote loped across a distant ridge. Somewhere behind us, the Chicago skyline was just a memory now, concrete, static, and irrelevant. I thought I'd feel empty, I said. Ray turned. And do you? No, I feel clean, lighter. He nodded. Sometimes it's the letting go that makes room for the right things. He squeezed my hand. As the train descended into the Bay Area that evening, the sky turned a pale, bruised pink. The fog crept in like a soft veil, wrapping the city ahead in mystery. Through the window, I could make out the distant shimmer of the Pacific. For the first time in years, the horizon looked like something to run toward, not away from. We arrived without fanfare. No one to greet us, no signs, just the echo of train wheels slowing and the conductor's voice saying, "Final stop." Ray took our bags. I followed him off the train. The platform was busy, but we moved like ghosts through the crowd, silent, certain. We checked into a small seaside inn that night, the kind with creaky floors and quilts that smelled of lavender and salt. The owner, a woman with silver hair and a fisherman's laugh, handed us a room key with a carved wooden tag. Room 4. Out back was a wooden bench facing the water. Ray and I sat there as the tide came in, the waves folding gently over each other like quiet promises. Ray reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notepad. Inside, he had drawn something. A sign. Welcome. Entry only for the kind. I laughed through my tears. You remembered. We're going to need a front gate someday, he said. With strong hinges and wild jasmine growing around it, I added. And a teapot always warm? And no space for shame. We didn't say much else. We didn't need to. The ocean spoke enough. The next morning, the light woke me. It streamed in through the sheer curtains, bright and golden. I made us tea and brought it out to the porch. Ray followed, wrapped in the soft inn robe, hair tousled like a boy's. We watched the day begin. No train whistles, no phone calls, just the rustle of the wind through the seagrass and the smell of salt and honey. I leaned my head on his shoulder. You think she'll ever call? He asked quietly. I don't know, I said, but I won't wait by the phone anymore. He nodded. Then we're finally free. I looked out across the water, and for the first time in decades I believed it. Sometimes the most powerful sign isn't the one that warns you away. It's the one you hang when you finally open your heart again. And mine said, welcome. Entry only for the kind. There are partings that come without noise, without anger. Just the quiet realization that one can no longer build a nest in a place that has stopped calling itself family. Marla and Ray did not retaliate with screams or counterattacks. They simply withdrew, carrying with them the only thing left intact, their dignity. And sometimes the refusal to continue suffering is the noblest form of revenge. No one needs to be hurt. No one needs to lose. Only the freedom to be oneself, whole and unbowed. If you've ever stood before a slammed gate like Marla did, been cast aside by the one you loved most, or simply had to choose letting go in order to keep yourself intact, feel free to share a story, a thought, in the space below. Because who knows? Your story might just be the sign that says, welcome, entry only for the kind. For someone like Lacey, who's feeling lost,